Hello again, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another edition of Grace to All with Paul Gray. And you're going to enjoy today. My new friend, who I've been friends with on Facebook for a long time, but just getting to know better recently, is with us, Rannie Childress. And Rannie's the founding senior pastor of Grace Ministries at Rafa, which means all are included. He's had a long and wonderful journey since his early days as a bartender, a ordnance man in the U.S. Navy. 15 years behind bars in Texas and Alabama. And he began his grace journey with Grace Communion International, then started with people I started with too, Steve McVeigh, Baxter Kruger, Paul Young, Mike Zinker, but mainly the Holy Spirit, as he says. He's got an MS in counseling. He's a chaplain. He helps lots of people in his part of the country and around the world via the internet. So, Rannie, thank you for being with us today.
Glad to be here, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. You all notice his accent's just a little different than mine. Here in Kansas, we don't have an accent, but everybody else does. Of
Right,
course.
right. Well, Alabama's the capital of the world.
I'd heard that. Yeah. Well, we're not quite the end of the world here in Kansas, but you can see the end of the world from here. You can see forever, and especially in western Kansas. Well, Rannie, I really appreciate you being with us. And as always, I like to start out by asking my guest, how has your growing understanding of God's unconditional love and grace and inclusion, how's that affected you where the rubber hits the road in your relationships, your friends, relatives, co-workers, the people you counsel? How's it made a difference there?
Well, Paul, it's changed completely the way I minister, the way I worked as a substance abuse counselor. It changed the way I work as a chaplain and a pastor. It changed my relationship with my wife and everyone that I come in contact with. I came out of a pretty rough background, straight into real legalistic type religious movements, and I thought at the time that's what I needed. And I've been with groups that thought we were the only ones. We're the only ones that had it, and everybody else would maybe get it later. But it's changed everything.
It has for all of us, and we'll get into that a little more deeper. Talk about the thinking we're the only group that had it. My daughter and her husband live in Augusta, and North Augusta, but they work in Augusta. And in downtown Augusta, you drive down one street that's just got a ton of churches in it, and you'll come to one that says the Holy Trinity Church. And a block later, the church is named the Most Holy Trinity Church.
Just a little bit more holy.
Yeah, just a little bit more holy. And boy, I'm glad that. Well, those places is like you said, when you started in a legalistic thing, I think the Lord orchestrates those for just what we need at that time in our life. What was it like in your life? It was when you were behind bars, when you got first started really listening to the Lord. Do I remember that right? And the organization you were
with? I did a lot of time. I did a lot of awful things when I was young. It took me a long time to realize that I was even forgiven for those type of things. But when I was incarcerated, I had been incarcerated for probably 5 or 6 years, and I was still basically doing some of the same stuff I did on the streets, as far as, getting high when I could and misbehaving and just violating all the prison rules and all that. But something just started changing in me. I started realizing, look, either I was too afraid to kill myself. So I'm either want to feel better here, and I really never thought I would get out of prison, never thought I would be free from that prison. And I just started studying and listening, and I got involved at first with I didn't want to be, I witnessed a lot of jailhouse conversions in religion in prison. I knew a lot of guys that went to the chapel at the prison, and they, they throw up the hands and pray and carry on and all that. Then they come back to the cell block, and they were not any different than they were the day before they went to the chapel. So I didn't want any part of that. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'll tell you, a turning point was for me, believe it or not, was an organization called Kairos. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's if you ever heard of the Emmaus Walk?
Sure.
Well, the prison version of that, it's the same thing. It's the prison version of that. It's called Kairos. And from my understanding, that's a Greek word that means God's time, special time. Anyway, volunteers came in, and they'd had several of those. They'd have one a year there at the prison. And I never would go because the guy said, well, they got plenty of cookies and drinks, and they isolate us up in the visiting room or whatever, and those folks come in, and it's fun, and I said, well, I'm not going for the cookies. I don't care. Then finally, a guy I had got involved with a substance abuse program there, and that's part of my story too that we'll talk about. And he asked me to go with him. He said, I'll go if you'll go. So we went. And I guess the biggest part of that was it impressed me. They were men from every kind of denomination you could think of, from Catholic all the way down to charismatic. And they agree when they participate in that program. I know now because I ended up being a civilian, quote, participant in the same program years later, that you have to just focus on that Jesus Christ is our Savior, is born, died, resurrected, ascended, and keep it at that. No, you're asked not to push any denominational issues and that type of thing. So I was really impressed with it, and I really did experience through those men, regardless of what denominations they came from, they expressed some unconditional love to us guys. They didn't look at us and label us by whatever kind of crime we were in prison for or anything like that. And they just were really nice to me. And that just impressed me so much that it motivated me to start kind of getting back into the Bible, because I grew up around church. I was afraid of it a little bit because I grew up around Pentecostal holiness, they call it here in Alabama. And I equated getting involved with church or religion as not having any fun. So I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And it kind of scared me because they did all that speaking in tongues stuff and all that. So I said, I'm going to go have fun. And I had so much fun, it put me in prison and almost killed me several times. So that was really fun. But, it was that kind of fun.
Yeah.
But it just led me through that Kairos experience, led me to get more involved. And somebody threw a magazine down on my bunk one day, and it was The Plain Truth from the old Worldwide Church of God.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at it, and I liked their little stories, and I got to reading it, and I'm like, now this is for me right here, because these folks, they got it laid out exactly what you're supposed to do, and you got these festivals to attend. I'm like, that's me right there. I don't want to go out here and get involved in all this old chapel stuff, so I bought into that. Mm-hmm. And it really helped me at the time. And I wrote them, and they ended up getting me in contact with a pastor that was in that area. And we corresponded, and he eventually came and visited me. And that's how, of course, I don't know if any of you know the story, but what used to be the Worldwide Church of God is now Grace Community International, and they went through a radical change over the years, and from legalistic to more Trinitarian thought. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how I started my journey. But of course, that I don't know where I go with this, but I know that led me into studying and trying to get a relationship back with, because I knew there was God. I just basically, kind of like in the recovery circles, I knew there was a God, and I knew I wasn't him, and that's about all I knew, So,
so that you reached out to that pastor, he communicated with you, he came to visit you, and started helping you in that way, right?
Yeah, and we got to be good friends. We still are today. He's a pastor over here in Birmingham, Alabama, near where I live.
Mhm.
He's retired, but like I'm supposedly am, but you know how that is. But we got to be good friends, and he eventually was given permission to come in and conduct my baptism there at the prison chapel.
Mhm.
Uh, and then, as I say, as the time went on, I don't know, the program there at that prison was what that I got involved with, the drug program or behavior modification. It was called a therapeutic community, and it was like they had chosen for, now I look back and I know things are not really coincidences. They chose that prison as an experiment for the first one in the country, in the nation, to place that type of program in a maximum security prison, and to cater to men like me who possibly would never get out. And they wanted to see how it would work. And it was sanctioned by the Department of Corrections and the state. And I remember one time looking out my cell and I saw these guys with suits, and they're like unusual. And one of them was a former U.S. Senator, Hal Heflin. He's dead now. He's one of those old time Southern senators from Alabama. But he had been involved in getting, I guess, the grant money to do this. And somebody told me, they said they're going to start a program here that's going to be something unusual. Do you want to be a part of it? And I'm like, no. And they didn't choose me to start with. They chose a core group of guys, and I wasn't one of them, tell you that. But my buddy, they chose my buddy, and I'm like, dang, we were, we had hung out together, and we kind of looked out for one another. And I knew him from home too. We were from the same hometown, and he said, well, why don't you see if they'll let you in too? And then we both can go over there. So we did. We went up and talked to the people in charge of it. And they said, they kind of hesitant, but they allowed me. They said, okay, we'll let you come in and be the core group. Well, a few days later, maybe a few weeks, whenever they're getting ready, they chose the worst cell block in the prison, the worst one, where most the drugs, that's the cell block they chose. They were going to put this thing in, and they were going to move this core group, us guys, over there, and I'm like, oh my God. I looked at my buddy. I said, I don't know how that's going to go. We looked out the window. We saw them going in there with drug dogs. And I know this sounds crazy, but we looked at one another and said, you mean they're going to be serious about us not smoking dope or anything over there? And we thought it was like going to be like a regular old routine prison program where you just go through and they give you a certificate and you go about your business. But we saw they were going to be serious about this thing. So I said, so I told my buddy, I said, man, we got to get out of this. So we backed out.
Really?
We backed out. We didn't go. Within a few, and my buddy, I won't go into details, but then he came to me with a plan to get some drugs smuggled in which we did those type of things back in those days, and it goes on all over the country in the prison. But I said, I had a bad feeling about it. And I look back now and I was like, I told my friend, I said, look, because I usually, with something like that, I say, yeah, count me in. I said, no, I don't want anything to do with it. He goes, what? I said, I got a bad feeling about it, man. I don't think it's a good idea. So I didn't. And sure enough, him and everybody involved with it got caught.
Mhm.
And they all got threw over in solitary and all that kind of stuff. And I was sitting there, and I remember when they come packed him up, was getting ready to take him to lockup, they call it. The officer looked at me and he goes, we don't know how you slipped by, but we're going to get you. We know you're in. I said, I don't know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
So I went over the next day and I said, is it possible I still get in this program? I thought I was like, the heat's on me. I got to do something.
Mhm.
So they did. They packed me up and moved me over to that program.
Wow.
And I'll say this, they were fixing it up, and the guys were fixing, they had made paint brushes out of aluminum cans, like to sell in the store. They'd take them and cut them so thin, used it to make homemade paint brushes. They cleaned the place up. It took a while, but I got involved, and this cell block turned into a treatment center that would anybody in the country would be proud of. It
Really?
was quiet. I mean, it just took over a period of time. And it was a serious thing. They took it serious. We had groups, all kind of. It was quiet. It got to where they had fish aquariums in there. The officers would come by and take their breaks in there so they could get away from the routine of the rest of the prison. And the majority of the men, if something happened, decided that we were going to prove to the system that we could do this.
Wow.
And we did, and it ended up being a model for the rest of the country.
Wow. Is that what led to you eventually getting released?
It played a big part in it. It ended up getting me involved in a speaking program, which at the time they called it free by choice, and they would take inmates out, let them speak to kids and at churches and different things. And I used to be, you might not know it now, but I used to be afraid to speak publicly, period. But that program taught me and made me get up and learn how to speak in front of people. Wow. And as a result of that, I got chosen as one of the guys that they would take out and let speak to kids and stuff. And they'd bring me back. They'd take me out, and it was kind of weird. You'd go out and speak and be out there all day speaking somewhere, and then back is right back in the middle of prison. It was just awesome. But that played a part in that. I came up for parole 5 times before I made it, but I came up. I worked for the warden there for my last year. I was at this maximum security prison, and he was a nice guy, I have to say. And I was just his runner, they call it. Flunky would be a better word. I mean, I cleaned up, and I washed his car, and I worked around the offices out in the front. And they trusted me to be around the secretaries and all that, and to do work for them and empty their trash and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, when I didn't make parole that first time, he called and had me pull strings and had me transferred to a minimum security prison, which they had granted me minimum security status because I had taken a 2-year college course. I had earned a 2-year college degree while I was there, and they evidently thought that was impressive. There was a few of us that did that, and they used that to justify giving me minimum security, which only meant that I could work out in my offices and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, they transferred me to a minimum security camp, and it just, and a lot of stuff happened. My wife that I'm married to now started writing me because they had put my name on the bulletin board at the church that I was affiliating with through the mail. And her husband had passed away, and she started writing to me. And we've been married 23 years now. And
wow.
I met her, she started coming to visit me and stuff.
Really?
Yeah, when I was there at the prison, and she had been in worldwide a lot longer than me, And anyway, so there I was, and I was like, whoa! Now I'm at minimum security camp, and there's a whole lot to it. I went to they had me working at a canning plant where they made Kool-Aid and pancake mix and all this stuff that they used in the prison system. And because when I first got there to that prison, I'll tell you this, they called me over and they set me in front of what they call a job board. And there was a warden there then, I don't know, I won't go into detail, but he wasn't too friendly. And the psychologist said, Mr. So-and-so, the warden, he said, I got a call from Dr. So-and-so over to, main office, said we might want to use this guy working in our drug program here, because they had a little substance abuse program there too. Said, because he's really good at it and he's been doing it for years and he can play. And that guy said, no, I'm putting him to work. And so he put me in like one of the worst jobs there at the canning plant. I just smiled and went on. I'd come in every evening covered in Kool-Aid powder and, and I worked really hard. And the man that ran that plant was a civilian. He worked for the Department of Correction, but he was not security. He was a civilian. And he got talking to me, and I just chatted with him and talked. And he brought everybody lunch one day. And all the other inmates that had been working there a long time, they said, we don't know what's happened to that guy. Said, he has never been friendly to us. They said, but since you started working here, all of a sudden he's bringing us lunch and being nice to us. And then one day he kept asking me about my things. And after a couple of months, he said, come here. He loaded me up in his pickup truck and drove me back down to the little prison, which was a few miles down the road, and took me in. He says, hey, and I thought, maybe I'd done something wrong. He took me in the job board office and said, y'all need to keep this guy here. I don't want him back at the canning plant anymore. They go, what did he do? He said, well, he didn't do anything but the best job that anybody's ever done since I've had anybody out there. He said, he's got a better attitude than anybody that I've met in a long time. And he said, what y'all need to do is turn him loose and let him go home. But he said, because I don't want him down there. He said, he don't need to be down there doing that. He needs to be up here teaching classes or something. And so they just sat there and looked at me, and they said, okay, we're going to put you in the substance abuse program. So I started running that substance abuse program. The civilian man that ran it, he turned it over to me, and I ran it.
Wow.
I taught the classes. I kept the notes. I did all that.
Wow.
And I got to know, the inmates there, and a lot of things happened. And I don't know, it's a long story, but I was sitting there one day and I was teaching a class, and they came and they said, they want to see you in the warden's office. I said, now what? They're going to put me back somewhere else, right? Well, somewhere down the road, I had also gotten a little degree while I was incarcerated, because, I locked up a long time, in cooking, commercial cooking. So can cook too. And I had worked some in the officer's kitchen at the other prison. Well, they took me to the warden's office, and they said, can you cook? I started to lie. But I knew they had it in my file. I'm like, they're going to pull me out of my cushy office job, put me over in the kitchen. And I said, yes, sir. I know how to cook. They said, well, do you want to go to a county jail and be a cook? And I thought, a county jail, which is, unusual. I said, what county? They said, in his words, I don't know, some redneck county up North Alabama. And sure enough, they had requested me as the cook at a county jail in Fort Payne, Alabama, of all places, where the Alabama boys are from, by the way, the country singers. And I'm like, this is strange. Well, they said, they're not going to let you go anyway, but they've requested you. They said, because you're under, because of the nature of your sentence and all that, they're not going to let you go. And the other guy sitting in the office says, well, I'll tell you, Lieutenant, he said, if the right person signs their name on the right line, he'll go. And come find out that it had to be approved by the Associate Prison Commissioner. And a friend of mine from the church at that time, during all this was happening, and I didn't know, he actually went and met with that Associate Commissioner and sat in front of him and told him why I should be allowed to go do this. And to this day, he tells me, well, I hadn't seen him in a long time. He said that commissioner sat there and looked at him and was signing his name and said, I don't know why I'm signing this. I'm not supposed to be signing this, but I'm signing it. And he signed it. And the next morning, they loaded me up in the back of a sheriff's car and started hauling me to that jail. And it was pretty cool.
Well, yeah, Randy, we're out of time, but
Well,
we're going to be able to do another episode that people will hear a week later and maybe even more after that. What a story you have. And thank you so much for sharing. I can see God's hand in your life through all of that and working all those things out. And uh, when we come back and people will hear the next episode next week, we'll pick up there and tell them some more about God's hand on your life, if that's all right.
That's fine. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Before we sign off, tell people how they can get in touch with you, how they can find you online, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, if you'd like to check out our ministry, you can go to our website at www.graceministries at Rafa. That's all one word.com. Or you can contact me through my email at chaplain170@gmail.com. And be glad to respond to you and answer any questions. And we have a Facebook page. It's under Grace Ministries at Rafa as well.
Great, and you're helping lots of people there. You got a wonderful team. We'll talk about that some more, but and we'll do that on the next episode. But we'll finish up now. Thank you, Rannie, for being here, and thanks everybody for being with us. Another edition of Grace to All with Paul Gray. All right, we're gonna stop.